What if the last Beatle standing isn't a symbol of music history, but the living proof that a fragile boy from a war-torn street can survive the kind of storms that should have ended him long before the world ever learned his name? This is the story of a man who outlived bombs, illness, abandonment, betrayal, addiction, grief, and even the legends he once called brothers, and still came back to offer the world the two things it needs most: peace and love. Ringo Starr is 85 now, an age he once thought he would never reach. His body has slowed down, his steps are softer, and there is a slight tremble in his hand when he raises it for his familiar peace and love moment. But even in this fragile stage of life, there is still a warm glow in him. Fans feel it every time he smiles, waves, or speaks. People across the world, from children to grandparents, still cherish him because he represents not only music, but kindness, positivity, and a lifetime of staying true to who he is. At this age, he carries a gentle calm in his face, but also a quiet heaviness that comes from outliving so many people he loved. Sometimes, when he stands in front of a crowd, flashes of his past run through him. He remembers being a sick child in a hospital ward, lying in a small bed with doctors wondering if he would survive. He remembers those early days when he could barely breathe, and no one was sure he would ever grow strong enough to live a normal life. Then another memory appears, one from a completely different world. The sound of stadiums shaking, thousands of people screaming, flashes of cameras, and the pure energy of being on stage with the Beatles. And then he returns to the present again, sitting quietly in meditation at home, focusing on breathing slowly, knowing it is this quiet practice that has helped him survive the hardest moments of his life. His birthday in Beverly Hills in 2025 was one of the most emotional days he has ever lived. The city declared it Ringo Starr Day, something that touched him deeply. Fans gathered from everywhere, cheering for him as if he were still the young man behind the drums. When he lifted his hand, that small shake did not push people away. Instead, it made them love him even more, because it showed how human he still is. Later that day, NASA surprised him by sending his peace message to the moon. The idea that his voice now rests somewhere beyond Earth made him emotional. He knew that the little boy who once struggled for life in a Liverpool hospital could never have imagined such a future. But behind the celebrations, the truth of age has become harder to ignore. Ringo has always looked younger than his years, but his health has reminded him that time is catching up. In 2022, he caught COVID twice. He hated canceling shows because he didn't want fans to feel disappointed. What hurt him most was knowing people had bought tickets, made plans, and waited for him. When he had to cancel, he felt like he was letting the world down. Still, he recovered and got back on stage as soon as he could, because performing is where he feels most alive. Then came the more worrying news. In 2024, doctors found that his white blood cell levels were almost double what they should be. They warned him that his immune system was not working the way it used to. Traveling, long tours, and constant movement could put him at real risk. They told him clearly that he should slow down, maybe even stop touring completely. For most people, slowing down at 85 would be normal. But for Ringo, music is not just work. It is his connection to the world, to his fans, and to the memories of the bandmates he lost. Stopping feels like losing another piece of himself. This put Ringo into a deep inner conflict. His body is pushing him to rest, but his heart wants to keep going. He fears that if he stops performing, something inside him will fade. Playing music is how he feels close to John and George. It is how he feels young, even when his body reminds him of the years that have passed. He knows he has already survived more than most people ever will. But this new challenge feels different. It is not a single illness or a sudden danger. It is the slow, steady truth of aging. And it is the one thing he cannot fight the way he fought everything else. What happens when the man who gave the world its backbeat is forced to face the one thing he can't keep in time, his own mortality? The question sits quietly in his mind. Even when he is surrounded by love, even when fans cheer for him, the thought remains. And so, at the end of that long birthday celebration, when the music faded and the lights went down, Ringo sat alone for a moment. In front of him were old photographs, showing him as a young boy, a young Beatle, a young father. Beside them were the recent medical tests that reminded him of the present. Looking at both, he felt a deep question rise within him, louder than any stadium he ever played. How did I survive long enough to reach this storm at all? That question gently pulls us back to where his rhythm truly began. Ringo Starr was born into a world that offered him almost nothing. His earliest memories were shaped by the sound of bomb sirens echoing across Liverpool during the Second World War. He grew up in the Dingle district, a poor neighborhood where houses were cold, food was limited, and fear was a daily visitor. His mother, Elsie, did everything she could to protect him. When the sirens wailed and the skies grew dangerous, she held him close and tried to keep him calm, even though she herself was frightened. She shielded him from falling debris, loud explosions, and long nights spent wondering if their home would still be standing by morning. For Ringo, safety was never guaranteed, only borrowed from moment to moment. When he was just 3 years old, his father left without warning. There was no goodbye, no explanation, and no promise to return. The empty space his father left behind created a wound that stayed with Ringo for the rest of his life. He would grow up remembering the absence more than anything else. It shaped the way he viewed himself, made him feel replaceable, and planted insecurities that followed him into adulthood. Elsie tried her best to fill the gap, working long hours to provide for the two of them. But she could not erase the feeling of being abandoned so early. Illness struck him again and again, as if life was determined to test how much one small boy could endure. At 6 years old, he was taken to the hospital for what should have been a simple appendix operation. Instead, it went horribly wrong. He developed peritonitis, a serious infection that left him fighting for his life. He fell into a coma, and doctors did not expect him to survive. His mother spent days and nights praying, hoping that her son would open his eyes. When he finally woke up, he was pale, weak, and too fragile to go home. What followed was a year in the hospital, a year separated from the outside world, a year spent surrounded by metal railings, white walls, and the quiet worry that he might get worse again. When he was finally discharged, he was far behind other children his age, but life had one more harsh blow waiting. Only a few years later, he contracted tuberculosis during a school outbreak. The sickness forced him into a sanatorium for almost 2 years. This time, he was older and more aware. He watched other children run and laugh outside while he remained behind glass windows, unable to join them. The loneliness stayed with him. Days blended into each other, and he learned early what isolation felt like. He fell even further behind in school and returned home without the basic skills most kids his age had already learned. He could not read properly, could not count well, and often felt lost in the classroom. When he tried to fit back into regular life, the outside world was not kind. The boys in the neighborhood saw him as an easy target because he was small, shy, and physically weak from years of illness. They pushed him around, called him names, and cornered him in dark alleys. One beating hit him especially hard, not because of the physical pain, but because of the message it delivered. He felt like he did not matter. That moment planted a deep fear in him, the belief that he could be pushed aside or replaced at any time. This fear would stay with him for decades, even at the height of his fame. To protect himself, he joined a local gang. It was not a group known for trouble or crime, but simply a band of boys who stuck together so others wouldn't pick on them. Ringo didn't join out of rebellion or excitement. He joined because he wanted safety, a shield, a way to avoid being hurt again. Life taught him early that the world could be cruel, and he needed to find some kind of protection, even if it meant blending into a rougher crowd. Despite everything he went through, something inside him refused to break. He had every reason to give up, every reason to believe that nothing good would ever happen to him. His childhood was marked by war, poverty, sickness, abandonment, and fear. Yet, he kept going. He kept surviving. The world would one day scream his name, but first, it tried its best to erase him before he ever had the chance to grow. This was the reality of his early years, a series of trials that shaped the man he would later become. And then, one ordinary afternoon inside the sanatorium, something small happened that no one paid attention to except him. A nurse, without thinking much about it, handed him a small stick and told him to tap on a metal cabinet to pass the time. That simple sound, that soft tapping, gave him a strange new feeling. It was the first spark of rhythm in his life. No one in the room imagined that this tiny moment would begin shaping the path ahead. But for Ringo, that faint metallic echo started something none of them could see, yet a path that would carry him far beyond those hospital walls. Leaving school was not a choice for Ringo. He had missed so many years because of illness that catching up felt impossible. He struggled with reading, counting, and basic lessons, and he knew he couldn't stay in a classroom any longer. So, at 15, he stepped into adulthood the only way working-class kids could. He went straight into factory life. The factory was loud, rough, and filled with older workers who had no patience for weakness. Ringo worked long shifts, surrounded by iron dust that clung to his clothes and made his throat burn. His lungs, already damaged from years of sickness, often felt heavy by the end of the day. But he didn't complain. He was used to discomfort. He had learned early that life didn't give him special treatment. Even with the noise and exhaustion, one thing helped him get through each day. He found himself tapping on anything he could reach: metal pipes, wooden, tables, old machinery, or even his own knees. The rhythms came naturally, without thought. While others smoked during breaks or chatted about football, Ringo tapped out patterns that felt comforting, almost like a heartbeat that gave his mind something familiar to hold on to. Music had not entered his life in a serious way yet, but rhythm was already living inside him. He just didn't know where it would lead. At work, he became friends with Roy Trafford, a boy who shared his interest in skiffle music, a simple, upbeat style popular in Liverpool at the time. The two of them often sneaked into the factory basement during lunch breaks. Down there, the air was damp, and the room was filled with old boxes, metal tins, and whatever scraps the factory no longer needed. To most people, it looked like junk. To Ringo and Roy, it was a place where they could pretend to be musicians. Ringo used biscuit tins as drums and tapped out rhythms, while Roy played along on makeshift instruments. It wasn't much, but it gave Ringo a small escape from the reality of his life. In those few minutes each day, he wasn't a sickly boy or a struggling worker. He was someone who created sound. His stepfather, Harry Graves, noticed how much Ringo loved tapping and making rhythms. Harry had always been kind to him, a stable presence after years of instability. That Christmas, Harry surprised him with something that changed everything: a battered, second-hand drum kit. It wasn't new or shiny. The bass drum wobbled, the snare was dented, and the cymbal was made from an old bin lid. But to Ringo, it felt like a treasure. It was the first real sign that someone believed in him, that someone saw potential in the rhythm he carried everywhere. From that moment on, Ringo became obsessed. After long factory shifts, he would rush home, drop his things, and run upstairs to practice. He hit the drums until his fingers split, leaving small marks of dedication on his hands. The neighbors complained about the noise, but he didn't stop. He had spent too many years being unable to do the things other kids could do. Now, he finally had something that made him feel alive. His hard work soon led to his first band, the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group. They played small gigs at local halls, church rooms, and sometimes even on makeshift stages put together with old wooden boards. Ringo wasn't paid much, sometimes not at all, but the feeling of standing in front of people, keeping time, and hearing them clap made everything worth it. For the first time, he felt chosen. Not because of pity, not because someone felt sorry for the sick boy from the dingle, but because he had something real to offer. The Cavern Club was one of the places they played, a crowded basement full of young people who loved music. That stage would later become a symbol of Beatles history, but even then, it felt special to Ringo. His skills improved quickly, and soon, people around Liverpool began talking about the young drummer with natural feel. One of the biggest breaks came when he was invited to join Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. At the time, they were one of the most popular bands in the city, far bigger than the small groups Ringo had been part of. Joining them felt like stepping out from the shadows. He wasn't just a kid tapping on biscuit tins anymore. He was part of a band that people recognized. With the Hurricanes, he played louder halls, bigger crowds, and more demanding sets. He also adopted the stage name Ringo Starr, inspired by the rings he loved to wear, and the idea of star time being his solo moment during the show. The Hurricanes eventually traveled to Hamburg, Germany, where bands played long, exhausting sets every night. The clubs were hot and filled with smoke, and the musicians had to perform for hours without rest. Ringo often found himself drenched in sweat, wiping his brow between songs as he tried to catch his breath. But he kept playing with determination. Hamburg strengthened him as a musician, forcing him to develop endurance and precision. It was tough, but he felt himself improving in ways he never could have back home. For the first time in his life, the world didn't just hit him, it answered him in the language of drums. His childhood had been full of things he couldn't control, but now the rhythm belonged to him. It was something life couldn't take away. One night in Hamburg, as he finished another long set and looked out into the dim room, he noticed three scruffy boys from Liverpool watching him closely. They were John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison, members of a band still finding their place. Ringo didn't know it yet, but those three boys would soon change everything he thought he knew about music, loyalty, and pain. Ringo's time in Hamburg was the bridge between the life he came from and the life he never expected to enter. Nights were long, hot, and noisy. Musicians played for hours, slept in tiny rooms, and lived on cheap food. The crowds in Hamburg wanted loud, fast music, and they wanted it non-stop. Rory Storm and the Hurricanes were one of the most popular Liverpool bands there, but the young Beatles were hungry and improving quickly. They crossed paths often, and every time Ringo sat in for Pete Best, something changed in the room. His timing was strong, his playing was steady, and musicians around the clubs began saying, "That lad's got feel." Meaning, he didn't just play the beat, he felt it, lived it, and lifted the whole band with it. Word spread fast. Ringo didn't know it, but John, Paul, and George had already noticed him long before anything official happened. They liked how he played, how he joked, and how he carried himself on stage. In 1962, they finally asked the question that would shift the ground beneath everyone's feet. They wanted Ringo to join the Beatles permanently. It was one of the hardest decisions of his life. He liked Pete best, and replacing someone was not easy for him, especially with his own history of feeling unwanted. But the chance to join a rising band with tight songwriting and strong ambition was something he knew he could not walk away from. When the news went public, everything exploded. Fans of Pete Best were furious. Crowds shouted, "Pete forever! Ringo never!" Outside shows, threatening letters arrived at Ringo's door. George Harrison was even attacked, headbutted by an angry fan who blamed the Beatles for betraying Pete. Ringo had barely joined the band and already felt pressure building around him. Deep down, he carried the same fear he had since childhood, the fear that he could be replaced at any moment. He tried to laugh it off, but inside, He wondered if he truly belonged. Despite the rough start, Ringo proved his worth quickly. His drumming brought a new feel to the band. It was steady, warm, and playful. He didn't just keep time, he made the songs swing. Early tours were wild. The Beatles traveled from city to city with barely any rest. They had no proper sound systems, so they often couldn't hear themselves play over the screaming fans. They were pushed through airports, dragged through hotels, shoved into cars, and followed everywhere. It was chaos from morning until night. Yet through all the madness, Ringo kept the beat going. In February 1964, they appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, one of the biggest television moments in history. More than 73 million people watched. Ringo sat behind his kit smiling, his head shaking to the rhythm, but no one knew he was surviving on almost no sleep and pushing through pure exhaustion. He had never seen anything like it. The screaming was so loud he couldn't hear the drums, but he kept playing, kept smiling, and became the surprise favorite of many American fans. Beatlemania reached levels no one had ever seen. Cars were crushed under crowds. Police lines broke. Fans fainted at the sight of the band. Inside hotel rooms, the four Beatles often stayed awake all night because the noise outside never stopped. Some nights, Ringo would sit on the bathroom floor trying to catch his breath, wondering how much of this he could take. But he didn't want to complain. He didn't want to seem weak. He had spent his childhood fighting just to stay alive, so giving up now wasn't an option. Then came a moment that cut deep into his oldest fear. In 1964, Ringo collapsed during a photo shoot with a fever of 102. Doctors diagnosed him with severe tonsillitis and said he could not tour. The band had no choice but to find a temporary replacement. They hired Jimmy Nicol. The moment Ringo heard this, his heart dropped. He stayed behind in a hospital bed, watching someone else take his place on stage before huge crowds. Newspapers printed pictures of Nicol playing, calling him the fifth Beatle. Ringo later said it felt like Pete Best all over again. He had fought so hard to build something with the band, and now he worried it could disappear overnight. But the fans shocked him. When he rejoined the Beatles in Melbourne, the crowd screamed his name louder than ever before. They held signs saying they missed him. They welcomed him back with pure love, and for a moment his fear eased. But inside, the cracks were still there. The stress was constant, the travel was relentless, and the pressure never stopped. He kept going because he didn't want to fail the band or the millions who adored them, but each year made the weight heavier. The whole planet was finally marching to his rhythm, yet inside, the shy boy from Liverpool still braced for the moment someone would quietly tap his shoulder and say, "We don't need you anymore." That quiet worry followed him like a shadow through every concert, every tour, every screaming airport. Still, he played with heart. His drumming powered songs that defined a generation. He was the steady center in the middle of global madness. The Beatles' shows became louder, bigger, and more dangerous. They played in stadiums that had never hosted musical acts before. Police struggled to control crowds. Sometimes the band had to hide in armored vehicles because fans were too strong for security barriers. Ringo, always smiling, kept the rhythm alive. But behind all the noise, something was changing. The pressure, the schedule, and the emotional strain were pushing all four Beatles to their limit. They couldn't keep performing like this. They needed a new direction, something different from endless screaming crowds. As the screams grew louder and the schedules grew harsher, the band stepped into a new phase of creativity that would rewrite music history. But for Ringo, it would also become one of the loneliest rooms he had ever sat in. The turning point in the Beatles' story didn't begin in a studio or on a stage. It began in Manila in 1966, during a trip that became one of the most frightening experiences of Ringo's life. A simple misunderstanding with political authorities turned into chaos. The band was accused of insulting the First Lady, even though they hadn't done anything wrong. As they tried to leave the country, crowds surrounded them with anger, shouting, and pushing. Soldiers looked ready to act against them. The band was terrified. Brian Epstein was punched, Mal Evans was kicked, and the Beatles had to force their way through furious crowds just to reach the airport. Ringo later said he had never seen such fear in George's eyes. They were used to screaming fans, not people who wanted to hurt them. That day left a mark on Ringo. It showed him how quickly love could turn to danger when misunderstandings spread. Not long after that, the filming of Help in the Bahamas added even more stress. The band was exhausted, and the filming environment felt tense. Locals mocked them, and some interactions were filled with rude comments and disrespect. Ringo, who was already sensitive and often unsure of his worth, felt especially uncomfortable. Fame had given them global attention, but it also exposed them to situations where they were treated like objects instead of human beings. The combination of Manila, exhaustion, and overwhelming pressure pushed the Beatles to make a major decision. They would stop touring. It was supposed to be a relief, a chance to escape the chaos of screaming fans and unsafe crowds. But ending live shows opened the door to something else entirely long, slow studio sessions that would reveal deeper cracks within the group. When the band began focusing entirely on studio work, the change felt exciting at first. They could finally experiment without worrying about how the music would sound on stage. But for Ringo, this new chapter was quietly painful. During the Sgt. Pepper era, John and Paul became more focused on building complex arrangements layer by layer. The sessions stretched on for hours, sometimes days, before they even needed drums. Ringo often waited alone, sitting in the corner while ideas were shaped without him. He taught himself how to play chess, just to pass the time. He later joked, "I played more chess on that album than drums," but the humor hid the truth. The more he sat there watching the others work without him, the more he felt unnecessary. Deep inside, Ringo still carried the insecurity of a boy who was often overlooked. Sitting for hours without being called made him feel like he was the kid nobody picked first for games. Even though the Beatles loved him and valued his steady style, the quiet moments affected him. He wasn't a songwriter like John or Paul. He wasn't deeply into spiritual or experimental music like George. He was a drummer who played from the heart, and sometimes in those long sessions, it seemed like no one needed that heart. Still, when he did get the chance to play, he created some of the most iconic drum parts in music history. His work on A Day in the Life is still studied by drummers today. His natural feel added life to songs in a way that machines or session players never could. He didn't overplay, didn't show off, he served the song, which is one of the reasons his drumming remains timeless. But no matter how brilliant he was, the loneliness in the studio didn't go away. Things became worse during the recording of the White Album. The atmosphere was tense, and the pressure inside the band was growing. Every member was dealing with personal issues, and arguments were common. At one point, Paul criticized Ringo's drumming, telling him to play differently or suggesting he wasn't doing enough. It hit Ringo harder than anyone realized. After everything he had been through in life, illness, bullying, and years of feeling replaceable, hearing those words from someone he trusted reopened old wounds. Ringo reached a breaking point. Feeling unappreciated and unwanted, he left the studio, left the band, and went to Sardinia to clear his mind. It was the first time he had ever truly stepped away from the Beatles. On a boat in the quiet blue water, he began writing Octopus's Garden, a simple and comforting song about wanting a peaceful place where no one argued or fought. The song came from his heart, a heart tired of tension, a heart that wanted kindness. While he was away, something unexpected happened. The other Beatles realized how much they needed him. Without Ringo, the band didn't feel complete. When he returned to the studio, he found his drum kit covered in flowers and a note welcoming him back. It was a warm moment, one that made him feel seen again. But the truth was more complicated. The gesture was real, but the deeper issues inside the band were still there. The world heard perfection. He heard silence, the kind of silence that whispers, "You're not needed here." That was what the studio years felt like for Ringo. On the outside, the Beatles were creating masterpieces. On the inside, Ringo struggled with feeling left out, overlooked, and unsure of his place in a band that had become bigger than any of them could control. The flowers on his drum kit seemed like the end of a conflict, but they were only a brief pause before something far more devastating. The collapse not just of a band, but of the only family he had ever truly known. When the Beatles finally fell apart, Ringo didn't hear it from a friend, a meeting, or even from one of the other band members. He learned about it the same way millions of fans did through the media. Paul had announced he was leaving, and suddenly newspapers everywhere were printing headlines that said the Beatles were over. Ringo felt shocked, confused, and deeply hurt. The band had been his second family, the only place where he ever felt chosen, and now it was ending without warning. It wasn't just the end of a group. For Ringo, it felt like the ground under him had disappeared. What followed made everything even harder. The breakup led to legal battles between the members and their management. Contracts were messy, money was tangled in lawsuits, and Ringo found himself in a strange situation. Even though he had helped build the biggest band in the world, he wasn't allowed to access much of his own earnings for years because the royalties were temporarily frozen. He had fame, but not freedom. He had a name recognized everywhere, but not the stability that came with it. It felt unfair and strange to him, as if he were being punished for something he didn't do. Despite everything falling apart around him, Ringo tried to build his own path. He released his first solo album, Sentimental Journey, a collection of songs his mother loved. It was personal and heartfelt, but it came out during the storm of the Beatles' breakup and got overshadowed. Reviews were mixed, and many people didn't take it seriously. Still, he kept trying. He wasn't someone who gave up easily. But music wasn't the only thing he explored. Ringo tried his hand at business, launching a furniture company called Rao. It seemed promising at first. They landed a huge contract to furnish palaces in the Middle East, and it looked like Ringo had found a new direction. But nothing sold. Not one piece. Everything the company produced ended up gathering dust in warehouses. It was embarrassing, and it damaged his confidence even more. He had tried to step into a world outside music, and the world had pushed him out. Acting became another attempt to find a new version of himself. He starred in The Magic Christian, Son of Dracula, and Listomania. Some people found the roles amusing, but many critics mocked them. Ringo wanted to prove he could do something different, something meaningful, but the harder he tried, the more the world laughed or looked away. Each failure piled onto old insecurities that went back to childhood. Each disappointment reminded him of every time he felt unwanted or replaceable. In 1981, while filming Caveman, Ringo suffered a painful accident. A stunt went wrong, and he broke his arm. For a drummer, an arm injury is more than just pain, it's a loss of identity. For weeks he couldn't play, and the disconnection from his instrument made him feel even more unstable. Drumming had always grounded him. Without it, he felt lost. Yet, in the middle of all this confusion, something good entered his life. He met Barbara Bach on the Caveman set. She was kind, calm, and had a warmth that made him feel understood. Their connection grew quickly. After years of chaos, heartbreak, and uncertainty, Barbara felt like a soft place to land. Their relationship gave him moments of normal life, shared meals, small jokes, simple days without pressure, but even love couldn't protect him from what was happening inside. As the years went on, Ringo began drinking more heavily. What started as a way to relax slowly became a way to escape. Then the drinking blended into cocaine use. He didn't realize how fast things were slipping. At first, He told himself it was manageable. But soon, he was drinking up to 16 bottles of wine a day. Days blurred into each other, time disappeared. Mornings and nights felt the same. He would wake up and not remember what happened the day before. Friends noticed, his family noticed, but Ringo wasn't ready to see the truth yet. In 1978, he overdosed. It should have been a wake-up call, but he ignored it. Instead of slowing down, the spiral got worse. Barbara was also pulled into the cycle, and the two of them drifted deeper together. Their home no longer felt peaceful. It felt unstable, unpredictable, and frightening. By 1988, everything finally hit a breaking point. In a state of intoxication, Ringo tore apart his own house. Furniture cracked, objects shattered, and the home they had tried to build together turned into a scene of chaos. Barbara was injured in the process. Staff members ran in fear. When the destruction ended, Ringo looked around and realized he no longer recognized the person he had become. The hands that once played steady rhythms in front of thousands had become hands that destroyed the walls of his own life. That moment cut through him. The man whose hands once steadied the chaos of stadiums could no longer even trust those same hands not to destroy his own home. The truth was clear: if he didn't stop now, he would lose everything. He would lose Barbara. He would lose his family. He would lose himself. Ringo finally understood that he could not fix this alone. He and Barbara made a decision that took courage. They entered rehab together. They walked through the doors not as celebrities, not as Beatles, but as two broken people holding on to the hope that they could still save themselves and each other. As the rehab doors close behind them, there are no cameras, no crowds, no drums, just two vulnerable human beings and a question that will define the rest of their lives. Can love and discipline rebuild what addiction has almost erased? The early days of rehab were some of the hardest moments Ringo had ever faced. There was no stage, no cheering audience, no spotlight to hide behind. It was just him, Barbara, and the truth they had been avoiding for years. He felt a deep sense of shame walking into the facility, knowing how far he had fallen. His hands shook not from excitement, but from withdrawal. Nights were long, full of thoughts he had pushed away with alcohol and drugs. Barbara struggled too, fighting her own battles beside him. For the first time in a long time, they had to look at each other without excuses, without running, without something to numb the feelings. They talked honestly about fear, about guilt, and about the pain they had caused each other. Those conversations were raw and uncomfortable, but they were necessary. Their healing didn't begin with comfort. It began with truth. Slowly, Ringo learned how to sit with discomfort instead of escaping from it. The therapists taught him to understand why he reached for the bottle, why he feared silence, why he avoided facing old wounds. Instead of hiding behind a drink, he learned to breathe through the moments that scared him. He learned to stay present 1 hour at a time, and then 1 day at a time. Barbara learned the same. They supported each other, taking small steps toward stability. They cried, they forgave, and they made promises they knew they had to keep if they wanted a future together. When they left rehab, Ringo made a decision that changed everything. He committed fully to sobriety. No more alcohol, no more drugs, not even just one drink. He created a new routine that kept him grounded. Every morning and evening, he practiced meditation. It became as important to him as drumming. It softened his mind, calmed his nerves, and helped him stay steady. He changed his diet, cutting out anything that made his body feel heavy or sluggish. A mostly plant-based lifestyle helped him regain energy and clarity he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in decades, he woke up feeling like himself, not foggy, not tired, not ashamed. His next challenge was rebuilding trust with his children and stepchildren. Addiction had created distance, and healing that distance took patience. He showed up consistently, not with grand gestures, but with small, steady actions, calls, visits, apologies, and honest conversations. He wanted them to see that the man standing in front of them was reliable now, not unpredictable. Over time, they began to trust him again, and the family slowly knitted itself back together in a healthier way. With his health improving and his relationships healing, Ringo started thinking about music again. But he didn't want to return to fame in the old way. He didn't want to chase charts or try to recreate the Beatles. Instead, he wanted something honest and joyful. That's how the All-Star Band was born. The idea was simple: gather talented musicians, let each of them shine, and enjoy the music without pressure. Critics rolled their eyes at first. Some said it was just a nostalgia act. Others said no one would care. But Ringo didn't start it for approval. He started it because it made him feel alive. And then something beautiful happened. People came, lots of people. Theaters filled up, audiences danced, laughed, and sang along. On stage, Ringo felt joy he had not felt since the early days in Liverpool. There were no screaming teenagers, no crushing schedules, no band tensions, just music, friendship, and fun. Each tour proved that he wasn't living off the past. He was building something new. He was no longer the ex-Beatle. He was Ringo, the bandleader, the survivor, the elder musician who brought people together. The applause felt different now. It wasn't overwhelming. It was warm. It was honest. Meanwhile, his marriage with Barbara transformed. Rehab had changed both of them. They learned how to fight healthier, how to communicate, how to step back when things got heated instead of letting anger explode. Their relationship grew stronger, not because it was perfect, but because they worked on it every day. They supported each other's healing. They protected each other's peace. Their marriage wasn't a fairy tale, it was a brave partnership, shaped through effort rather than ease. Through all these changes, Ringo felt himself becoming someone he had never fully been before. He wasn't the frightened boy from Liverpool anymore. He wasn't the overwhelmed Beatle. He wasn't the man lost in addiction. He was someone new, someone steady, someone proud of the life he was rebuilding. For the first time since Liverpool, Ringo wasn't just surviving the beat, he was choosing it. But life has a way of reminding us that peace is never permanent. Just as Ringo finally found balance inside himself, life began shifting around him again. Old wounds and approaching losses started to cast long shadows ahead. The world was quiet for the first time in years, but that quiet carried something else with it. The reminder that even when you heal yourself, you cannot stop the people you love most from slipping away. Loss did not come to Ringo all at once. It arrived in waves, some quiet, some violent, each one taking someone who had shaped him, and each one leaving him a little more aware that the world he started in was slowly fading away. The first major loss was his father. Their relationship had always been complicated. His father left when Ringo was only 3, and the emptiness that created stayed with him for most of his life. As an adult, they tried to rebuild something, meeting occasionally, talking politely, trying not to disturb the distance that had settled between them. But there was never a true bond, never enough time to make up for the years that were lost. When his father died in 1981, Ringo felt a strange kind of sadness. It wasn't the sharp pain of losing someone close. It was a quiet grief. The grief of losing the chance to ever fix what had been broken before he even understood the world. He mourned not the relationship they had, but the relationship they never got to have. Losing his stepfather, Harry, was different. Harry had been the steady presence Ringo never expected. He was the one who taught him what kindness looked like, what reliability felt like. Harry was the man who brought home the second-hand drum kit, the gift that would change Ringo's entire future. When Harry passed away in 1994, Ringo didn't just lose a father figure, he lost the person who had unknowingly handed him his destiny. It felt like losing the last adult who had ever believed in the dreaming, fragile boy he once was. But nothing compared to losing his mother, Elsie. She was the anchor of his whole childhood, the woman who protected him during air raids, who worked exhausting jobs to keep them fed, who sat beside him through endless hospital stays. She was the one who held his hand when he woke from a coma, the one who whispered reassurance when he feared being left behind. When she became ill and passed away in 1987, it broke something inside him that never fully healed. He described it as the moment the world went silent. The woman who had given him his first home, his first safety, his first love gone. Even at the height of fame, he couldn't stop that kind of loss. That truth stayed with him. The loss of Maureen, his first wife, was another wound, but one made from complicated threads. Their marriage had been full of affection, but fame, distance, and young mistakes weakened it over time. When the marriage ended and he learned about Maureen and George's brief relationship, it hurt deeply. It wasn't just betrayal, it was confusion, disappointment, and a cracking of trust inside. The small circle he thought was safe. Yet with time, he learned to forgive. Their bond didn't vanish after divorce. They remained connected through their children and through a quieter, more mature understanding of each other. Then came the illness. In 1994, Maureen was diagnosed with leukemia. When Ringo heard she was fading, he rushed to her side without hesitation. He stayed with her, held her hand, and whispered memories only the two of them knew. For all the pain they had shared, she had once been the love he ran home to in the early Beatles days. She had been the mother of his children, the young woman who believed in him when the world was still uncertain. When she died at just 48, it left a mark on him and on all who had known her. It reminded him how life can take someone before you ever expect it. Losing John was a different kind of shock altogether. In December 1980, Ringo was in the Bahamas when he got the call. John had been attacked outside the Dakota in New York. He felt the world drop out from under him. He flew to New York immediately. In the Dakota, Yoko asked him to help with Sean. And then came the moment that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Little Sean looked up at him with tears in his eyes and asked, "Ringo, are you here to see Daddy too?" Ringo could barely speak. The city outside held silent vigils, candles flickering in the cold. But privately, he was shattered. John was more than a bandmate. He was a brother, a fire, a force. Losing him felt like losing a piece of the world's heartbeat. Then came George. Their friendship had survived wounds, healed slowly, and grown stronger with age. When George became sick, Ringo visited him often, sometimes sitting quietly, sometimes sharing old jokes, sometimes just holding his hand. Near the end, Ringo had to leave for Boston because his daughter needed emergency surgery. He leaned down and whispered, "I have to go." And George, weak but gentle, gave him a reply that broke him completely. "Do you want me to come with you?" It was the last pure expression of their bond, tenderness, humor, and love, all at once. When George passed away in 2001, the world mourned, but Ringo mourned a piece of his own soul. Each loss carved him differently. His father taught him about absence, Harry about kindness, his mother about devotion, Maureen about shared history, John about shock and heartbreak, and George about forgiveness and deep connection. With every goodbye, another piece of the world he came from disappeared. The people who knew him before fame, before fortune, before the world claimed him, they were fading, one by one. The man who once played for seas of strangers now found himself standing in hospital rooms where the only sound left was the absence of the voices that had built his entire world. And after George's passing, as fans across the world held candles and sang, "Here Comes the Sun," Ringo felt a fear he had never spoken out. He allowed the fear that one day he might not be remembered as a living man at all, but as the last surviving echo of a story everyone else had already left behind. Ringo's later life looks peaceful from the outside, but that peace wasn't something he was born into. It was something he built slowly, almost stubbornly, after years of storms. By the time he reached his 80s, he had created a life that was comfortable, stable, and meaningful. A life that showed that survival isn't only about making it through hard times, but about choosing what truly matters afterward. His fortune, which now sits around hundreds of millions, isn't the flashy kind people imagine. The homes he collects across the world aren't trophies, and they were never meant to impress anyone. Each one was chosen to be a safe place, a space where he could slow down, breathe, and protect the calm he fought so hard to earn. His Montecito property is full of trees, quiet corners, and soft light. His Beverly Hills home holds rooms filled not with awards, but with paintings he made during peaceful mornings. His London place is where he keeps old photographs, journals, and memories too personal to display anywhere else. These houses aren't about wealth, they're about healing. After a life on the road, they hold the comfort he once feared he might never find. But Ringo never forgot what it felt like to have nothing. Maybe that's why his generosity grew alongside his success. Through the Lotus Foundation, he and Barbara funneled millions toward causes that matched their past struggles: addiction recovery, child support programs, cancer treatment, disaster relief, homelessness. When people asked him why he donated so much, he usually shrugged and said something simple like, "Because I can." But those who know him say the truth runs deeper. He gives because he remembers what pain feels like. He remembers the hospital beds, the fear of not being enough, the loneliness of losing people. His charity work wasn't about image. It was about turning his old wounds into something useful for others. Even his art, the spin art, digital art, and paintings became a source of charity. Limited editions sold out within hours, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. Fans bought the pieces because they loved his name, but many kept them because they felt his warmth in the bright colors and playful shapes. It was creativity without pressure, fun without judgment. For Ringo, it was a new way to express himself that didn't depend on fame or competition. Still, age brings its own challenges. In 2022, Ringo caught COVID twice. The second time was harder. He had to cancel shows he wanted to perform, and he admitted the cancellations hurt more emotionally than physically. Then came the blood test results in 2024, showing high white blood cell counts, a sign that his immune system was struggling. His doctors urged him to slow down, to rest, to let his body recover. For a UT2, the man who spent his entire life moving, performing, and proving himself, learning to stop, was almost painful. But age teaches everyone the same lesson. Protecting your health becomes more important than proving your strength. This shift marked a turning point for Ringo. He reached an age where he no longer felt the need to outdo the past or chase the approval of strangers. He started choosing rest over pressure, wellness over worry, and moments of love over endless work. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of being still. He stopped living to meet expectations and started living to protect what mattered. Barbara, his children, his peace, his memories, and his music. When his 85th birthday arrived in 2025, it became more emotional than anyone expected. Beverly Hills declared it Ringo Starr Day, something that would have felt impossible for a boy who once lay in a Liverpool hospital bed fighting for his life. At the celebration, thousands raised their hands for his yearly peace and love moment. His own hand shook slightly, a small tremor of age he couldn't hide. But instead of pity, the crowd responded with warmth. People cheered louder, not because of the tremor, but because it made him human, real, and deeply loved. Then came the incredible surprise. NASA announced that a recording of his peace message had been sent to the moon as part of a time capsule. A boy who once slept through bombings in Liverpool now had his voice resting in the silent dust of another world. It wasn't about ego, it was about meaning. It was a reminder that small beginnings don't limit the size of your legacy. In private moments, Ringo spent more time preparing for the future, not his, but the future of the people he would leave behind. He carefully arranged his estate so that Barbara and all his children would be protected. He made plans for archives, music, and artwork so fans and museums could preserve the history of a life that touched the world. Even in planning his legacy, he kept the same simple message he shared every year: peace and love. He believed those two things mattered more than talent, fame, or money. As he reflected on everything he had lived through, the childhood illnesses, the Beatles years, the addiction, the losses, he arrived at a quiet wisdom. Conflict fades, love doesn't. He learned that fame rises and falls, but kindness stays. He learned that grief hurts, but it doesn't erase the memories of the people we love. And he learned that even when your body grows weaker, your spirit can grow stronger. His story isn't just the story of a famous drummer, it's the story of a person who kept going even when life tried to stop him. It's a reminder to anyone listening that pain doesn't mean you're finished, age doesn't mean you're useless, and loss doesn't erase the value of what you've lived. Ringo's life shows that resilience is built one day at a time, that healing is possible, that joy can return, that you can start over even after breaking completely. In the end, his greatest masterpiece wasn't a song or an album. It was the way he learned to live with everything he'd lost and still choose peace and love. And before we return to the very beginning with the main hook that will frame his entire journey in a single unforgettable image, one question hangs gently in the air. If a frail boy from Liverpool could survive war, illness, fame, addiction, grief, and time itself, what might still be possible for you, right now, in the life you're holding?